Well, thank you all for hosting me. It's great to be here on the real American Independence Day, 4th of July. I know Donald Trump, when he introduced his tariffs, called that Independence Day. I like to think it was July 4th, 1776. So 249 years for the United States. I am going to speak for about 30 minutes on my book, which came out in February. We'll take questions as we go. If people are curious or just want to put a hand up and ask, and we'll leave time for questions at the end as well. The motivation for the book was really a reflection on Microsoft turning 50 years old, which happened on April 4th of this year. And a couple of years before that happened, myself and my co-author asked ourselves, how does a company remain innovative for 50 years? How does a company even kind of stay in business and continue to operate for 5 decades? And so with that as a curiosity, we went around and we started interviewing people around the company. One of the nice things about Microsoft is that we have a culture of sharing. We have a lot of people who've been at Microsoft for decades, and there was a real oral history that we were able to tap into. These were just some of the people that we interviewed. We did over 40 interviews over the course of a couple of years, and we started synthesizing what we were learning. And we realized that there were these kind of multiple distinct periods that Microsoft went through where it was extremely innovative, but it got locked into what we call the rigidity trap. It got locked into a certain way of doing things that made it vulnerable. And a competitor would come along and start to successfully compete with us. And there was an effort to then fundamentally reinvent the way we operate, organize the culture of the company. And we did that 4 times throughout the course of our history. At the end, I'll do a quiz to see if everybody can remember the 4 technological transformations. What's interesting about this, though, is we're right in the middle of the 5th reinvention. And I think this is going to be the hardest and the most challenging, but also the most exciting. And that's reinventing the company in the context of AI. So I'm going to do the talk in sort of 3 sections. The first is architectural innovation, which I'll explain what it means. The second is speed. How do we really move fast when we're trying to innovate? And the third is talent. What are the characteristics of people, cultures, and organizations that innovate effectively? Now, architectural innovation was probably the single most important insight from the book, so much so that we created this word to describe it. When most people think about innovation, including myself, we immediately think technology. So when we set out to actually write the book, we organized it around chapters, products, Xbox, Visual Studio Code, Microsoft Office, Azure. But every time we went into one of these groups to talk about the product innovation, they always said the same thing. Product and technology are important, but it doesn't have full impact if we don't innovate the business model and the culture. And so we came up with this framework, which is probably one of the most central to the book, that technological change is one dimension of innovation, but the business and the culture has to be innovated at the same time. If you do those 2 things together, you get architectural innovation. I'll give some examples of that. Architectural innovation is really hard to achieve, but it's incredibly hard to compete with. It's very, very hard for people to both innovate on the business and culture and on the technology change. And so some examples of this would be jet engines were an example of a radical technology change that made airplanes go faster. But the fundamental business of air travel was the same. Ride sharing like Uber or Lyft was a new business model, but you're still in a car, you're still with a driver, you're still kind of fundamentally using the same technology. Instagram was an architectural innovation. The idea that technologically we'd have cameras in our phone, we'd take pictures, we'd share them, and that business-wise, we'd monetize it through advertising. And that's why all of the image sharing and all of the social media sites have been so hard to disrupt, because they've done the 2 dimensions of innovation and gotten into that architectural quad. I'll come back to that with a few examples. But let's talk about Xbox. Any gamers in the room? Any PlayStation enthusiasts? It's okay. So I worked for Xbox for about 5 years. We fought very hard for the European market. We never really won it outside of the UK. But we did do some cool innovation with Xbox. And over the time that I was there, we transformed it from fundamentally a hardware business where we're selling a console and we're making a profit margin in the console to a Netflix-like subscription business, which is what we call Game Pass, on any device for any person. Now, that was a series of reinventions that was started by Phil Spencer, our CEO of gaming. And he took a look at the gaming market, the audience for games. He said, you know, there's 3 billion people out there playing games. Can we have a single business model that's going to serve them all? Probably not. So he said, we're going to diversify our business model. We're going to have consoles, we're going to stream to devices, we're going to have subscription services. But what's really fascinating about the way they came at it is they said, reinventing the business model is fundamentally about reinventing the culture. It's very easy to say we're going to have a new business model. We used to sell this way, now we're going to sell that way. But the way you implement the business model is embedded in the cultural norms, practices, vocabulary of how people go about their day-to-day. We see it all the time where a company says we're going to change new business model, and they don't change the culture, and nothing actually fundamentally changes. So 2 steps that they had to do that. Innovate culture. They actually created a team that monitored the culture, managed it like a product, had metrics, reviews, and could see how they were changing. And rehire the team. And I love this one. Every time they were going to fundamentally change the business model, they printed out, figuratively speaking, every JD, and they went through and marked it up to say, this is how your job will change as we go into this new world, whether that's cloud gaming or subscriptions. They then very distinctively asked, is that okay with you? Do you want to take on that new role? If you're an engineer who spent their whole career building transistors for a console, and now you're in cloud gaming, that's a big pivot. You don't want to pretend that it doesn't actually change what you do, but at the same time, you bring the people in to shape it and give them the opportunity to write their new job description. So that was an example of Xbox and how they kind of changed the overall business. Visual Studio Code, does anyone use it? Has used it? Excellent. That's why I love kind of technical university talks. Anyone know where it was invented?
It's a project from Microsoft.
Correct, but geographically.
Yeah.
Close, Zurich. So it was kicked off by a team in Zurich that had 6 people. And the story about Visual Studio Code was that we had a very similar product called Visual Studio. It was for enterprise developers building for Windows PCs, massive scale, the .NET framework, hugely dominant, 80, 90% market share. But in about 2015, we noticed there's a segment of developers that was building not for the PC, building for the mobile device. They're building for the browser. We called them the born in the cloud developers. We're like, these guys are doing it slightly different. They're not thinking about the infrastructure and the tools that we're used to. Now, the question is, what do you do in this case? You've got a product, it's successful. Most people would look at that and say, we'll evolve the existing product. We'll take our existing Visual Studio, we'll add some features for these guys that are crazy about, the cloud, and we'll be good. That would have failed because what you would do is just compromise and serve 2 markets poorly. So what our leadership did is they said, we're going to create a fundamentally new product. It's going to be built from the ground up for these born in the cloud developers. It's going to be free because they don't pay for the editors that they typically use. And we're going to put it out there and we're going to make it open source so people can adapt and develop on top of it. Now, they realized that if you try to do that too close to the existing product, it's going to get crushed because that's the biggest innovation killer we find in big companies is an established product is threatened by a new product. So they hired Eric Gama. He was from IBM Research at the time. They said, you've got 6 people. You can set it up anywhere in the world. And he was from Zurich, so he wanted to build it there. 6 people. 3 months later, they shipped the first product. And about 10 years on, it's the most used coding environment in the world. And even with the enterprise developers, we've got about 80% market share. Now, what I love about this case study is one, they made the hard decision. We're not just going to expand the existing product, fundamentally new product, different location. By the way, they thought about London and they're like, you know what? London is only 8 hours ahead of Redmond. We want 9 hours ahead because we want no overlap on the time zones. We want this team to be fast and agile. And then they came in and they founded VS Code on a single principle, zero distance to the customer. They're like, we are going to be fundamentally customer driven. And they went beyond open source development and they coined a term, development in the open. So not only was the code base open source, their entire roadmap, their strategy, their plans, and they would always make themselves available to anyone who had a recommendation from the community. So a really interesting way, Visual Studio Code is now more profitable than the incumbent product and has a larger user base. And they never actually came into conflict, which is a really cool story of shepherding two products, kind of through this growth phase. We always quote Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School, when he says, your historical successes, the things that made you successful in the past, will often prevent you from innovating in the future because you get locked into the old ways of doing things. And then Julia Lewison, who's the president of our developer division where Visual Studio Code is maintained. I just love this. She said, innovation is creating something that changes a customer's life. If it doesn't change someone's life, it's not innovation, it's just a cool idea. And this was an important vocabulary element we found in our research is our best innovators never talked about invention. They're like, you know what? Invention is just creating something new. And that's great. And that's the starting point. But innovation is all the additional work to bring it out into the market, to sell it, to support it. And that's a much bigger undertaking. And so, Julia, if you've got an idea, you can go to her, anyone, any level in the company. Everyone else is going to ask one question. What's your customer hypothesis? What is it that you think customers need that we're not delivering? And how can you create something new that delivers it? And very specifically, she uses the term hypothesis because a hypothesis is falsifiable. You can go in and say, I think customers need this. And she's like, great, go run some experiments. Think like a scientist. Go and actually interrogate your hypothesis, validate it. If it's valid, we'll move on, we'll invest more. If it's not, we've learned, and we'll step back and we'll try something else. Aha, anyone heard of this company? Yeah. One of the things when we were starting the book is we wanted to be very intellectually honest. We said, we want to talk about successes as well as failures. And Google is probably the biggest failure, I think, in Microsoft's history in terms of missing search as a new technology. But what's less understood is that it was not actually the technological innovation that we missed. We were able to reverse engineer their search algorithm in a matter of months, and we could actually match them in terms of quality and relevance. But what they did was a business model innovation that created a flywheel that we could never break. So what they did was they obviously had ads on the page. They sold them to advertisers, but two innovations. One, they would sell them on a performance basis. So you only pay for your ad if someone clicks through and buys something on your site. And then they did something that everyone was skeptical about. They eliminated a fixed rate card for pricing the ads, and they sold them at auction. And everyone thought, that's crazy. You'll never make any money on an auction. But the auction is a brilliant price discovery mechanism. And so if you've got people who know exactly what they can pay because they're going to sell a product and they can bid based on that, you get this economic efficiency that brought money in. We only found out how profitable Google was when they went public. And then we looked at their filings, we're like, oh my God, this is an incredibly profitable business. And we raced to try to catch up, but the flywheel that they created was unbreakable. Now, there's a happy ending to this story, or I think somewhat happy ending. Bing was obviously our search product. We, at most, got about 25 to 30% market share. We could never become the market leader. But we realized that search is such an important technology. It has implications for machine learning, AI, human-computer interaction, that we funded a small Bing team They were about 1/10 the size of Google. And we gave them a single go. Take a little bit of share from Google every quarter, fractions of a point, almost irrelevant commercially. But what it did was it forced them to get very creative, resourceful, and innovative because you're fighting against this massive entity with a fraction of the budget. And that's another learning from our research is constraints really breed creativity because when you've got a limited budget, you think very openly about how to use it. So my favorite story about Bing is they moved from classical machine learning to deep learning about 3 years before the industry did. Not necessarily because they wanted to, but they couldn't afford classical machine learning. It took too many you had to have too many scientists writing custom algorithms, tuning them, maintaining them, keeping them in balance. They said, this deep learning thing, we throw a bunch of data at a model, we train it, it gets better, it learns through reinforcement learning. And that was the whole reason that Bing became the tip of the spear when we started the OpenAI partnership. And all their models would come into Bing first because they had that expertise and knowledge. One other kind of cool story was cognitive services was also 2015 innovation. And a small group had this idea, AI is getting important. We need AI as a service. And they cobbled it together, getting AI models out of Microsoft Research and developer support out of Azure. And similarly, when OpenAI partnership started, this was where all of our models landed. So the point of that story is that innovation is this repeated set of successes and setbacks. And there's always the setbacks, but you can learn and actually get ready to fight the next wave of innovation. And the question for those listening was how do companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon lead with the customer? Actually, you set me up perfectly because I'm going to just jump a few slides ahead. It's an Xbox case study as well. When the first generation of the Xbox had come out, the third generation, we blew it because the third generation was one where we led with technology and we did not lead with the customer. So forever after that, this was the paradigm that was used throughout Xbox. It's B, X, and T. And B stands for business, X stands for the user experience, and T stands for the technology. And the problem in a company like Microsoft is you always lead with the T if you're not incredibly careful. It's what we understand, it's what we're passionate about, it's what we know really well. So what Xbox did is they would not make a major decision unless they had representatives in the room from the business side, the technology side, and the user experience side. Those could be designers, those could be customer researchers. In a lot of cases, that would be the customer themselves. They would bring customers in or game studios. And this was the framework. We found versions of this in every group that we researched. They didn't always call it BXT, but unless you literally imprint this on how you're making decisions, you're always going to end up back here. So that one version of that shows up almost everywhere. Did that kind of answer?
Yeah.
So the Office story is this interesting one where they decided about probably 6 or 7 years ago that they wanted to fundamentally pivot to being an AI first business. And they wanted to go from being a product that ships every 3 years to one that ships every 3 weeks. And so the leader at the time, Sumit Chauhan, put together a plan to do this. And they wanted to focus on speed and agility. And they kind of defined their mental model for that using borrowing from physics. And they said, to go fast, you need two things. You need force multipliers and you need friction reducers. And they did a couple of things that we found really critical. Force multiplier was they eliminated the normal engineering waterfall where you write a spec and then you do reference code and a reference architecture and so on and so forth. They brought together the multidisciplinary team, which was engineering, design, and marketing, and Microsoft research. So they brought all 4 disciplines together, formed a multidisciplinary steering committee. And then every probably 3 to 4 months or major milestone, they bring that group together. And they would ask questions like, are we using the latest research? Can we actually market this to customers? Is there a value prop? Is it buildable? Is it, can we keep it within the cost time frame? And so within about 1 year, they had fundamentally pivoted to a model of shipping every 3 months. And they had two governing metrics. The one was user satisfaction, but the one that we thought was brilliant and that we didn't see anywhere else was not how many features did we ship, which used to be the focus, but how many features are being kept by people who experience them. And we've all seen this. If you've used Office over the years, you've seen all these new features come in, and very, very few of them are getting used. And so a single metric watched by the senior leadership team every week is we put new features out of people using them and keeping them. They called it kept rate. And if they're not, we take them away, we decrement them. Maybe we bring them back later. But really pivoting the metrics and the go-to-market was the story here. And this was Sumit, who's the CVP for Office, talking about getting the engineering in place and then the business change. How are we on time, by the way? Okay. I'm going to kind of wrap up a little bit and then we'll just go to Q&A. Okay, talent. When we set out to write this book, I told my co-author, I said, we are not going to mention a single person in the book. And there were two reasons for that. One, I didn't want to keep track of all the quotations. Thought it'd be a headache. And two, I thought we want it to be universal. We want to describe processes and cultures and strategies. And as soon as you start talking about people, you're bringing individuals into it. What we found was we couldn't even get through the first chapter without writing about probably 5 or 7 people, because people are so central to the innovative process. There were a couple things we learned from that. One was the best organizations that wanted to be innovative were mapping their people to the 3 phases of the innovation life cycle. Discovery, where you're out kind of in research mode, learning something new. Design, where you're sketching the framework of what you're going to build. And develop, where you're going to actually create it. And what we found is that there's 3 different personality types in every company that map to those phases. Pioneers like to be on something new. If it gets to be even semi-mature, they're bored. Settlers are a little more comfortable in this phase where there's something to work from, but it's not fully defined. And town planners really like scale. They like operating at scale. They like scorecards. They like metrics. They like to kind of standardize things. And the worst thing any manager could do would be to map someone to the wrong phase. And so 2 things come out of this framework. One is just the vocabulary of saying, hey, are we in a discover mode now? Are we just open-ended discovery? Or are we in a design or we are develop mode? And then we just ask people, are you pioneer? Are you settler? Are you town planner? And we can make sure that you get into the work area that you thrive and that you're most comfortable in. Very few companies think of this. They tend to look at technical skills and they're like, okay, you understand Python code, so you're working in this product because it's Python based. Really mapping the personalities to the phase. And then we discovered a 4th phase. I was so happy when we discovered this because I realized what I am. And it's a boundary crosser. And these are people that just love working across disciplines, across organizations, even sometimes across companies or even business to academia. And these were so critical because what you find is that an innovation often starts in research and then it makes its way into kind of maturation and scale. And it's like a relay race where you're passing the baton. And probably the single biggest killer of innovation was when the baton gets dropped and these people shepherd things through. So I'm just curious, can anyone see themselves on here? Anyone want to volunteer?
I think I'm a bit of a crosser.
That's good. Yeah, that's me. Yeah. Now, in academia, you probably find fewer people who would say I'm a town planner. This tends to be people who have been in the corporate world for a while. Any pioneers, settlers? Yeah. All right, I'll let you off the hook. Okay. So fitting people with phase was the first aspect of talent that we discovered. Second was we say innovate recruiting to recruit innovators. Now, Microsoft has a very standard process for how we recruit. And it's written down and it's detailed, and in some cases it's required by law. But what we found was that the groups that were most innovative had found some additional things to do during recruiting to assess innovative sort of aptitude and motivation. One, this was Bing. They just leave a little free time in the interview loop. You're on campus for a full day. We give you maybe 3 hours of interviews. And we observe what you do with the free time. Do you follow up? Do you IM people? Do you grab a coffee? Assessing for curiosity. Two, this was Visual Studio Code, 2-day pair programming interview. They bring you on campus. Someone sits down and pair programs with you for 2 days. What they kind of said from that is no one can fake it for 2 days. You can fake an interview, you maybe even fake an interview loop. You sit down and pair program, we're going to know exactly what your skills are, what your disposition is, how culturally you would fit. And the other thing is you would ship some code into the product by the end of the 2 days. So even if you don't come back, you're kind of part of the community. This one, I just love this. And then Xbox, when they recruit, they look specifically, we used to talk about cultural fit, but now we say we want cultural add. We want someone who brings something new and different that expands our culture. And the idea here is today's culture probably won't solve tomorrow's problems. So every time we hire someone, that's almost like a DNA graft onto our culture. And we want to use everyone to move the culture in the right direction. Our Chief Scientific Officer, Eric Horvitz, I just couldn't say it better. You are who you hire. And the last thing I'll say is we have a dedicated hacking facility called The Garage. And we do a hack once a year. 70,000 people come together and hack for an entire week. And we think that's one of the most important things we do as a company. And I believe we're bringing alumni into it. And there's a movement to maybe bring academia into it. But we're always amazed if you take 1 week and just sit together and try to build something, how far you can get, and then how much momentum you can build. So I'm sure you all kind of hack in various ways, but this is something that in a big company, it's hard to do. But with this investment, we found it really, really pays dividends. And this is our head of The Garage who kind of talks about the motivation. I will leave it here, a little bit of promotion. So if anyone wants to buy the book, the QR code is there. But I really encourage you to join our free learning community with this QR code. It's absolutely free. As we do new content and drops and chapters, you'll get it, and free to sign up. And then I always close by emphasizing that all proceeds from the book go to support STEM education charities. Part of our mission was to help people who are working and studying today to be better innovators, but also to kind of create that next generation of innovators kind of coming up through the ranks. So feel free to join our learning community and buy the book if you like. And I'm going to leave it there and throw it open to questions.